So yeah, thanks Dorothee for the very kind introduction. You already gave away the title of this talk. It's about the ValiText tool in the Codex toolbox. Some very brief information about me. I'm Lukas. I'm a research associate and PhD student in the 4th year at the Leibniz Institute. And my research interests are broadly computational text analysis, measurement theory, not just text analysis, but social science measurement in general, and data quality. And if you have any questions, you can just Google my name. I think you will find all the contact information. The one here on the slide is the GESE's email address. And I want to start this talk with giving a little bit of a context why we thought about the tool ValiText. I want to start this presentation by outlining that language is at the core of many social science research questions, and also the study of language. So here I got 3 politicians, as you can see, and politicians talk, so they make statements. For example, we should protect our way of life, the bureaucracy has become disconnected from everyday life, or they just do not want to understand us. And when we as social scientists want to study these kind of statements, we usually need to rely on social constructs to identify shared patterns and common themes. So think again about, for example, we should protect the way of life, one of these sentences. We could imagine that they can be somehow related to maybe populism or populist language. So in populism, the source I've cited here, Lisa Zentner, she wrote a whole dissertation about how populist language expresses itself in text. And it's quite difficult because populism is a very multifaceted construct, but it contains many elements. For example, and this is not an exhaustive list, images of people versus elites, claims for like a unified national identity, very anti-establishment rhetoric, we against them, opposition to diversity, direct appeals to the voters or to the people, and also politicians acting as the leaders and as a voice of people. And if we want to formalize this process of detecting and measuring these social constructs in texts a little bit more formally, we usually follow a specific research pipeline. And I'm focusing here, this is a talk about computational text analysis. You can already see here it's computational methods. So this is the pipeline when we measure constructs using computational methods. And we usually start with some kind of social construct. In our case, we're interested in what causes or what determines populism. And the assumption is always that if someone somehow acts or is a populist or wants to speak popular or wants to act populist, this should express itself in the human behavior, in our case the politician, and then the human behavior results in text artifacts. So for example, a social media post of a politician criticizing the government. And what we can then do as researchers is we use these texts and rely on computational methods to derive numerical measures. And then we can use these numerical measures in the subsequent analysis. And to make this even more visible, it's really like to make this sequence quite clear. I have an example here. Again, this is a sentence from the first slide. They just do not want to understand us, as like a statement. And we can use this text and put it into some kind of model. This is, for example, a Mistral model. It's an open source kind of alternative to GPT. I guess maybe one of you have worked already with it. And we can prompt it. We can give the model guidance. Take the sentence of a politician. Is the statement populist or not? And then, as these computational models always do, they give us a response. So for example, the response here would be, this is populist. Yes. It changes a little bit if we do not ask take the sentence of a politician, but if we remove context of the prompt. For example, take the sentence, is the statement populist or not? You see this will change the score. Here I've checked it using multiple models. Here the response is more often this is not populist, just because there's the context of a populist language missing. You can also ask the models to rate certain statements. So for example, take the sentence of a politician on a scale from 1 to 5. How populist is it? And yeah, this is the screenshot. This is, I think, ChatGPT, but I mean, it's just for highlighting the capabilities. Here it would be like a 3 out of 5 on a populism scale. There's even like some explanation, but the takeaway here is that we would have like a score of 3 out of 5. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. Of course, we can also give, or we can adjust or improve the measurement using different strategies. We can also give it some examples. So for example, take the sentence, etc. And here then we can also give it examples of populist statements. Or if we are interested in a specific variant of populism, or we define populism in a specific way, we can also give the model these kind of definitions. So I define a statement as populist if it is either, and then this is like a more universal definition of populism. But it could also be relating to populism in a specific cultural context, in a specific country where there are, like, I don't know, specific historic dependencies. Yeah. And as you can imagine, we now have like all kinds of different measures for basically the same sentence. And for those social scientists under you, they know that any measurement needs to really capture the intended social construct. So we need a mechanism to improve this, or to make this happen, to make sure that these mechanisms, or that the measures accurately capture intended social constructs. And yeah, we rely on validation to do so. Validation is a critical task for any social science measurement. This is not only relating to computational text analysis. And measurement validity is defined as the extent to which a scientific measure captures what it is supposed to measure. And there's, whole libraries on validation theory, but like I think the common ground is always that researchers need to provide validation evidence to demonstrate that their measures capture what they are supposed to capture. And the idea is often that every measurement contains some kind of mismatches to the true constructs. So whenever we measure something, there's always kind of distortions, and they can be random. So they can basically appear due to the limitations of the research design. So when we give, for example, the same text to 10 coders, and we train them for weeks, they will still make some random errors and will probably not come to the same conclusions. What's a little bit more problematic, because it's not random, are measurement biases, which means systematic deviations from the true value of the construct, basically. And I will explain a little bit what this means for text analysis on the next slides. And these kind of errors and biases, they appear quite often because textual analysis is actually very, very challenging. And these are the 3 main challenges that appear when trying to analyze text. The first one is ambiguity and multidimensionality of textual content. And we also have limitations and biases inherent to computational methods. And the third one is blending of disciplinary traditions and terminology. And I'm rushing a little bit through the next 3 slides because each one of these could be like a whole media expert series on its own. I have also linked some sources in the PowerPoints, which you can access, some more literature. But yeah, I think I'm focusing on some challenges in particular, just to highlight that text analysis is really, really challenging. That's the key takeaway for you. So here I have a comparison of a table that compares characteristics of textual and survey data. And we at GESIS, we work a lot with survey data, and we know there are also lots of challenges involved, but the characteristics of survey data are actually kind of better to handle because, for example, when we think about data collection, we can really design how we want to collect data using surveys. We can think about, okay, we are interested in populism, then we can design items and everything before the data collection. The data we get are usually unidimensional. So on a Likert scale, for example, we only get responses from 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. And there's no context-specific interpretation of data features possible. So if we have a high value on a scale, we can directly interpret this as a high value on the construct. And textual data, I think the key takeaway is that they are very messy. So as social scientists, we usually work with, or mostly work with data that is collected passively. So when we want to analyze social media feeds of politicians, we don't have access to the writing process of these politicians. So we have to rely on the sources we get from them. So we also have to conceptualize the construct after the data collection. So we need to have access to the data and think about, okay, how could, for example, populism express itself in this specific context that the politician was in. Textual data is also very multidimensional. So a single sentence, there's like an infinite number of words. And if there are 10 words in a sentence, this gives room for like an infinite number of combinations on how to express something in texts. And it's also context-specific interpretation of data features possible, which is also very true. If we have the same text, someone might think this is a bold statement, and the other one might think a specific statement might be arrogant. For example, if a politician says, "I'm a good negotiator," some will think, "Oh yeah, that's a very good statement." The others will say, "That's very arrogant." So, having said a lot about this, like I said, also a lot of literature on the content analysis literature, ambiguity and multidimensionality of textual content. Then we also have limitations and biases inherent to computational methods. And the point I want to make here is that there's recently been a shift, also significantly affecting my dissertation, because like earlier models, like 5 years ago, usually the problem was that these models were too simplistic. For example, dictionaries, where you just have like a long list of words that are, for example, populist words that can be said, the elite, the people, and so. And then it was just aggregated. So basically, it was just counted how many words appeared in a specific text, for example, totally disregarding context and humor and the relationship between sentences and everything. And with the shift to large language models that really took off, I would say 3 to 4 years ago, we have solved a lot of these problems, but introduced new kind of limitations and biases. I think the one that always comes out and which is still not solved is algorithmic bias. So biases in training data and annotation processes, they are just baked into these models. And we also have like researchers' degree of freedom, a problem of interpreting these model outputs, hallucination. These are all kind of problems that can arise due to limitations and biases inherent to computational methods. And then the last one is blending of disciplinary traditions and terminology. This is a very methodological problem and is caused by the fact that text analysis or computational text analysis in the social sciences draws from multiple disciplinary roots, political science, natural language processing, psychometrics, social sciences, sociology. And there are diverse assumptions and best practices about what constitutes sufficient measurement and validation. So what we saw and still see is that the terminology on how to define what a specific measurement process and a validation process means very significantly, and there's an overlap and shifting meaning of key terms. And this results in fragmented validation, taxonomies, and frameworks. And coming to the end of this context section, this is where ValiText comes in. This is exactly the goal. So ValiText is a framework. It's a unified framework and tool for validation of computational text-based measures of social constructs. And I would say it's rather a collection of tools and frameworks. So it consists of a general framework, but also guidelines and checklists for how to conduct validation. And everything what I'm telling you in the next 3 or 4 slides is documented in the paper and in the Codex toolbox, where you can also then access the materials. The link is here on the slide, but I'm sure we can also send you the link in the chat later. The overarching framework that kind of guides the validation is displayed here. I'm not going too much into detail. I think I still want to keep it somehow concise, but I want to focus on like this upper part. One of the key ideas of ValiText is that there are 3 types of validation evidence that every text-based measure of social constructs needs to be displayed. So you can't just rely on external evidence, talking about what this means in a second, without disregarding the other ones. So each of these 3 need to be present to have like a valid measurement of social constructs in text. The first one is substantive evidence. It's defined as outlining the theoretical underpinning of the measurement. And like I said, we have a use case in the next couple of slides, and I think it will become clearer what this means then. Very much relate to content analysis literature in other social science measurement instruments literature. Then we have structural evidence. Here's the goal to examine and evaluate the properties of the model and its output. And external evidence tests for how the measures relate to other independent information or criteria. And it's also important to always conduct robustness checks, do some multiverse analysis, etc. Now, ValiText can be applied to the most common computational text analysis use cases. So we have individual checklists for specific text analysis methods. Those are dictionaries, kind of the classical semi-supervised classification pipeline where you train your own models using training data, prompt-based classification using large language models. This is the example I've showed at the beginning of the talk, and topic modeling. Right. So I just assume that most of you are somehow familiar with computational text analysis. You can definitely find more information on the slides on these specific use cases, how they work. And right, so for each of these use cases, we then have different checklists that really guide the researchers to document specific validation steps, very detailed activities they can and should do, partly to validate their text-based measures. And this is a screenshot here from the Codex toolbox. This is kind of a box where you can decide on your use case and download the checklists directly to your computer. It's like a Word file, and there you have space to fill out what you did for your specific validation. You can also see that there are, like, for each validation step, we have different sources and references, performance criteria on when we kind of, or like when the literature says that something should be done in a specific way. For example, comparison with human annotations, or when you do manual pre-coding, coding your data in advance using human coders. It's always a good idea to use at least 2 or 3 coders. This is very standard in the content analysis literature and should also be adhere to in the computational workflow. Okay, I will then take the last 10 minutes of this talk before we go into the question section for introducing a case study. And yeah, that's a paper I wrote together with Clemens Lechner, who is also a colleague at GESIS, which has luckily been now fully accepted for publication in Political Analysis. I just received the mail this morning, so that's very cool. This will be open access published, probably in like 1 or 2 weeks, but it's also available as a preprint. And the idea here is that we want to measure politicians' public personality traits using computational text analysis. And the idea why we wanted to do this is that we think personality is important. So for example, we see here the picture of former Chancellor Olaf Scholz. And when you see this picture, at least those of you familiar with the German context, I'm sure we all think about him in a specific way. We associate specific personality traits with him automatically. For example, here Sabine Kinkert, the German journalist, says Olaf Scholz is not a person who often shows great emotion, and he's not an extrovert. He's a thoroughly controlled person. And other politicians definitely have another style of acting like a public figure. Here's Boris Johnson, also formerly known as the former British Prime Minister. And a UK journalist kind of has a quite different characterization of him. So basically saying he's a human laundry basket and has the habit of forgetting to shower. He is blessed with immense charisma, wit, sex appeal, and celebrity gold dust. He is also recognized and loved by millions, not so much by those who have worked closely with him. This is, of course, like a very subjective characterization. But I think the key takeaway of these 2 pictures is that we see this also in the literature, that personality as a subject of interest is very much growing. So what personalities do voters look for, but also what personality traits do politicians signal to their constituency. And one methodological problem in this field is that all approaches to measure politicians' personality have limitations. Because, and again, this is a little bit too much into, I don't want to go too much into detail, but roughly you can give politicians self-report surveys, which they can fill out. You can assess them by experts or the public. You can ask experts what kind of character traits does this politician have, or you can do content analysis method based on transcripts and statements of speeches. And each one of these has their limitations. And one promising solution, or at least a promising amendment to these methods, is to use computational text analysis to at least study the public personality. Like what kind of signals does the politician signal to the public in terms of personality? And the research question of the paper here was then can we use computational methods to validly measure public personality traits from public communication? And this is not a talk about a specific paper, so this is more like for the documentation. But in very short terms, what we did is we sampled top politicians in Germany. We had a sample of roughly 40 politicians between 2017 and 2021. We have 3 different data sources. We collected all social media posts on Twitter, formerly Twitter and Facebook, parliamentary speeches, and interviews which they did in public broadcast formats. We transcribed them and got the interview data and collected 15,000 sentences from each of these data sources. We analyzed individual sentences. So basically say, okay, one sentence can give us an indication, we call this personality cue, on a specific personality trait. We focus on 2 traits, but it can be extended to any traits. You probably know the big 5. We chose the big 2, basically, the agency communion model. Agency is defined as the strive to get ahead and show assertiveness, and communion is striving for connection and unity and empathy. So like very core traits that politicians can show. What we then did is we used different computational models. We have 5 different models, which we used to kind of measure these 2 personality traits. And of course, we validate our measures using strategies outlined in the ValiText framework. We filled out the checklists for these measurement approaches, put it in the appendix of the paper. And yeah, in the next slides, before we come to an end, I briefly present the major validation steps that we conducted. So the first one, if you can remember, substantive evidence. Here the idea is to outline the theoretical underpinning of the measurement. And what we did is we reviewed previous approaches to measure politicians' personality. We've then focused on a very domain-specific personality traits from a validated personality inventory, like specifically designed to measure politicians' personality. We hand-coded more than 1,000 sentences in a very iterative process. We had some amazing student assistants that supported us here and got quite good agreement on the identification of the traits in these sentences. We also, by design, use different data sources, and then we of course also check if there are differences within the data sources. We have multiple computational models and 2 different conceptualizations of what we see as a personality statement, as a personality cue. For example, strong, you can say I'm a strong man or woman. Then it would be, or like I'm a stable genius would be a very strong claim. But there are also more subtle claims. You can say, yeah, I went to Harvard, or I went to, I understand this very good. This might be a little bit more weaker signaling of that specific cue. Yeah. This is just the visualization of our approach. So first we selected the 2 traits, agency communion. We thought about, okay, how can they be conceptualized in text? How can they appear in text? We developed a code book. We validated this code book, and this is all part of the manual coding process. At the end, we had labeled data. And then we went to the computational text analysis part, had different kind of models, GPT-4o, Llama, DeepSeek, and XLM Roberta, and the support vector machine. And then we predicted the annotated data, if there was a kind of convergence, and conducted even more systematic validation. For example, what we did then for structural evidence, the second part of validation evidence, here to examine and evaluate the properties of the model and its output. What we did here is we kind of designed, before we even tested the models on some kind of external data, we designed functional tests. We call them test units. And the idea here was that the models should be able to predict the items of the original personality inventory, which we used as an inspiration for the codebook and the coding. So for example, the 3 items for agency, one of them was, for example, I'm a born leader. This would mean like a very strong signal for agency. We have 3 items for communion. For example, I show understanding for the needs of disadvantaged people. And then we have 12 other sentences that are unrelated to the specific traits. So for example, this policy proposal needs adjustment. Probably not signal like a strong personality signal. And then we tested them. So we basically know what their true values are. We predicted them using the models. And we could already see that green is always good. Green means good predictions. And only GPT-4o and DeepSeek were able to correctly classify all of the examples we gave it. So we didn't use any fancy real-world data here. We just kind of designed these functional tests, and we can already see, okay, the support vector machines, they're actually quite bad. All of them, like, there was a tendency definitely to predict only the other categories. Yeah, and also here there were lots of errors. We also did external validation. So external evidence test for how the measure relates to other independent information and criteria. I think one of the most needed and one of the best ways is to compare your model predictions to human annotations. Of course, we did this, and this is the macro F1 score, so kind of how good the predictions were. And we can also see that DeepSeek as a model performed best. GPT-4o also considerably well. What we also did, and I think this is one of the last slide, is that we kind of predicted if our scores are also related to real-world relationships. So what we did here is we predicted, so kind of we aggregated the score for communion, so kind of here the empathy score. We aggregated them, calculated mean communion scores for each politician and then for each party. And then we checked if there was a relationship to the left-right continuum. The idea is that left-leaning parties show more universal levels of communion compared to, for example, the AfD or FDP, the liberals in Germany, which are not particularly known for being like very empathetic in their language. And yeah, we see a very clear relationship here, both for the economic dimension and also the libertarian, authoritarian dimension, that our communion scores are way higher for example, the Linke or the Greens than for the CSU, FDP, or AfD, as expected. We also did more validation, which I'm only teasing here. We explored gender differences. We also applied our models to the presidential debate between Trump and Harris. And they all kind of give puzzle pieces to kind of make sure that our measure somehow measures what it is supposed to measure. Okay, coming to the end of the talk, we were quite happy to see that ValiText helped us significantly to guide, structure, and document our validation process. And yeah, but the cautious remarks at the end are important because validation is a critical and very, very tedious task. So validation can never be fully standardized and always requires critical thinking and adoption of frameworks. And we saw that in this process, things to constantly consider data quality issues, model bias, and really making sure that there's an iterative process in the measurement and validation process.